and informative session, sir. Let's on to the next session on challenge cases in endocrinology. I invite the persons of this session, P.G. Sundaraman, Senior Consultant Technical Endocrinology, Apollo Hospitals and Bilrath Hospitals, Chennai. He Edward GVN Oration, the Kamdas Oration, and Presidential Oration. Conferred Best Doctor Award conferred by Tamil Dr. MGR Medical University, Chennai on 2012. President of Endocrine Society of Tamil Nadu in 2015 to 2016. Has many publications and sir have written many book chapters. I invite Dr. B. Nayak, Additional Professor and Head, JIPMER Pudri. He has researched in the areas of steroid and cancer-induced diabetes, osteoporosis, and adrenal disorders. He has made publications in reputed journals. I request chairpersons to invite the speakers and take over the meeting, sir.
Good late morning, dear colleagues and friends. Once again, we are entering into the challenging cases in endocrinology, and we had a nice overview about pituitary and adrenal imaging, the earlier talk by Dr. Rajeshwaran. So here is the clinical scenario of challenging case in the pituitary and adrenal lesions by Dr. S. Sridhar, who's an associate professor at Department of Endocrinology and Metabolism at Madurai Medical College. He's a very renowned endocrinologist who did his MD from JIPMER and DM from Chandigarh PGI. He was a treasurer of the Endocrine Society of Tamil Nadu. He had more than 25 publications. He was the best outgoing student in MD in JIPMER. So over to Dr. Sridhar, who will be highlighting the challenging cases in endocrinology, especially related to pituitary and adrenal.
So hope my slide is visible. And
yeah, it's visible. It's visible.
So good morning, one and all. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizing secretary, Dr. Vijay Bhaskar Reddy, for giving this opportunity, as well as Professor Dr. Sundaraman sir for the nice introduction. And I will be discussing regarding the challenging cases in endocrinology, focusing the pituitary and adrenals. And I will be taking around 20 to 25 minutes of your valuable time. And I will start with the pituitary case. So this particular individual is a 34-year female presented with the history of galactorrhea for past 1 year and second amenorrhea 6 months before the onset of presentations. Otherwise, to rule out the local causes or pathology, the history was asked. Otherwise, no history of mass in the breast or foul smelling or blood stain discharge from the breast. And this particular individual was treated with oral pills for amenorrhea, and she has taken for 2 months and then she discontinued. And otherwise, no history of any drug intake for these particular individuals. Just a minute. So otherwise, no history of weight gain or fatigue or constipations, no history of blood loss during the childbirth. In view of secondary amenorrhea, the history regarding the Sheehan syndrome was asked. But otherwise, since she is having galactorrhea, the Sheehan syndrome is very unlikely. And the last childbirth was 8 years back, and she has P1 and L1. And any history of galactorrhea, one should rule out the most common etiology of hyperprolactin, that is a drug intake. Classically, the drug-induced hyperprolactinemia or drug-induced galactorrhea, they have regular cycles. In our particular patients, she has secondary amenorrhea for a period of 6 months. And the most common drugs are the dopamine blockers like metoclopramide or domperidone or levosulpride, or more commonly the pantoprazole, PPA inhibitors groups. So before going and antipsychotics like risperidones and other antipsychotic drugs, so before going into the extensive evaluations, one should not forget to ask the history of the drug intake. So the drug intake is one of the most important history one should not forget to ask in case of galactorrhea or suspected cases of hyperprolactin. Otherwise, other systemic causes are less likely, and the physiological causes can be a pregnancy and as well as in lactations. And some of the pituitary adenomas, whenever they compress the stalk, they may have the hyperprolactins, but it is not very severely high. And this patient subsequently underwent the hormonal profiles, and you can see that here the thyroid profiles are within normal range, and LHFSH within the normal range. And you can see that the serum prolactin of around 235. With the normal range, we expect less than 25 in a female, and cortisol was normal. So the all pituitary hormones you should evaluate whenever cases of pituitary cases or any case of secondary amenorrhea due to the pituitary pathology we suspect. And so these patients were underwent other hormonal profile. Since clinically there is no suspicions of androgen excess, we didn't do. And these patients subsequently underwent the MRI brain. And this is the T2 weighted images, since already the previous speaker highlighted about the CSF. So here the CSF is in the white. So the T2 weighted images, and you can see that there is a pituitary macroadenoma, and you can see that the supracellular, that is the optic chiasma, is compressed. And you can see here the internal carotid, the dotted one on the left side is the internal carotid, and it encasing the internal carotid. The below one is the sphenoid sinus, and here is the ethmoidal sinus. So the compressing the supraoptic chiasms and optic chiasm. So the more common presentations may be a bitemporal hemianopia if unnoticed in the early stage, or in late stage irreversible optic atrophy. And the size of the tumor was around 2.6 into 1.6, and with predominant the paracellular extensions. Otherwise, the visual field and visual acuities were within the normal range. And in view of very high prolactins and the pituitary of the macroadenoma, this particular patient was diagnosed as a macroprolactinoma, and she advised cabergoline 2 milligram per week. So it is a long-acting drug, cabergoline, and we can give twice per week, preferably at the bedtime, in view of avoiding the partial hypotension first dose effect. And she responded to the symptoms with reduced galactorrhea, and the cycles become regularized. And you can see that this is the serial follow-up of the prolactin, and the prolactin became the normalized. And to assess the response clinically, whether how much reductions in the pituitary before starting as well as after 3 months of the cabergoline, we advised the MRI, and subsequently this patient's last follow-up. And she presented 5 months later with the features of pregnancy, with urine pregnancy test as well as the ultrasonogram confirm of pregnancy with the 5 months of amenorrhea. And she stopped treatment on her own without any consultations after the pregnancy became confirmed. And because of the COVID situations, she presented later and in the form of recurrence of galactorrhea. So the known case of macroprolactinoma conceived while on cabergoline, and she presented with gravida 2 and pregnancy, and how to follow up and how to proceed, because she has symptomatics at period of 5th month of gestation. However, she doesn't have the visual symptoms. And my previous radiologists have highlighted about the normal physiological changes which is happening in pregnancy as well as in the pituitary. So pregnancy, the normally physiological increase in pituitary size. Moreover, these particular patients is already having macroadenoma. Moreover, she discontinued therapy and she conceived. So we may expect there is increase in the size of the tumor. However, she conceived, but normally we expect the increase in the size of the tumors because of the physiological changes as well as in the existing the pituitary tumor. And the prolactin levels may increase. So the prolactin assay is not a good test to assess the individual status in pregnancy. In pregnancy, so we may have very limited options. And so these patients subsequently underwent non-contrast MRI. So the contrast is contraindicated usually in pregnancy. So we subject CT also contraindicated. So we subjected this particular individual with non-contrast MRI, and you can see that there is a less than the previous size. With the size of the tumor was 2:1. With one of the cystic lesions, this was noted in the pituitary. And since there is no other options to measure the prolactin, because prolactin always will be more than 100 in physiological itself, and we cannot go by prolactin level. So one is the MRI, another one is the visual field and visual acuity. That is the two options we have, and this patient's visual field, luckily it was normal. And since in view of macroadenoma and in view of symptomatic like galactoria, this particular individual was again started cabergoline while on pregnancy. That is supposed in second trimester she has come to our outpatients clinic. And again, we started the cabergoline, and since almost 4 months were left before the delivery, and we were planning to stop the cabergoline before 1 or 2 months before the delivery, since there is the lactation is an essential thing, and for the regular or normal lactations, the cabergoline needs to be stopped. Then only she can able to lactate normally. So the challenging issues in this case, so hence the prolactin may not be useful to monitor, and it will give a very high level even in non-pituitary adenoma people individuals. So the prolactin is not a useful test in such situations. And MRI, again, in view of macroadenoma, we subjected her for MRI. Otherwise, in microadenoma, once she became pregnant, we can stop the no need for MRI investigations. And the safety of dopamine agonist in pregnancy, and we will share some 3-4 slides regarding to these agents. So the ideally pre-conceptionally, when in the reproductive age group individuals, when planning pregnancy, bromocriptine may be the choice, but now the availability and side effect profile is more in favorable of cabergoline, and as well as the long-acting effect of the cabergoline. And the micro and intracellular macro, whenever the size of around 1 to 1.5, and pregnancy may be recommended. In case of macroadenoma, particularly the macroprolactinoma, we have to achieve the normal size of pituitary. Then we may able to advise for this pregnancy. But in this particular individual, she lost follow-up, and while on macroadenoma, she became conceptions. And both are crossing the placenta, bromocriptine and cabergoline, both in animal study as well as in the human study. And robust data are available for bromocriptine, whereas the cabergoline, the data are now upcoming. And as per the guidelines, macroadenoma with the supracellular extension, particularly it abuts the optic chiasms, we have to advise against pregnancy in the period. But once she became pregnant, and we subjected her for the cabergoline, and not responding, it is very rare. Many of the prolactinoma, more than 90%, they were response to the cabergoline therapy. And if not responding, then transpenal, because we have to save the mother as well as to the baby. So the two live, we are taking care. And this is the guideline recommendations. So the large intracellular tumors abuts the optic chiasms, we advise against pregnancy. But if become pregnant, then cabergoline may be the considered. If not response, then either other options. So this is one of the case I want to highlight in such situations. And moving to the second case, it is one of the challenging cases of adrenal. So this particular girl, 8-year-old girl, presented at the year 2016 with the weight loss and loss of appetite and progressive increase in generalized pigmentations as well as the vomiting. So the classical features of clinical features of Addison disease, and she was ill-built as well as the malnourished, and hyperpigmentations over the palm and the sole area, as well as the upper lip. You can see the hyperpigmentations along with vitiligo. So the vitiligo is one of the marker of autoimmunity. One should not forget to examination, and otherwise he doesn't have any features of lymphadenopathy. And you can see that this is comparison with their mother, and there is a comparing the mother, and there is the more and more pigmentations, more in the knuckle area as well as the palm and the sole area. And subsequently, this particular individual underwent electrolytes. It was found to be in the form of adrenal insufficiency features, and LFT were normal. And we were working out the cause of tuberculosis in these individuals in view of Addison disease. And subsequently, she underwent the hormonal profile. You can see that the moderate elevations of TSH with the antibody positive, that is more than 500. And she underwent the cortisol and ACTH stimulation test before the starting the steroid therapy. And one thing I want to highlight it for the physicians and practitioners, if in any case you are suspecting adrenal insufficiency or Addison's, before giving the steroids, you always try to take the sample. So by taking one blood sample, it is we are we are accurately diagnosing the particular individuals. ACTH doesn't change with 1 or 2 doses of steroids, hydrocortisone. Otherwise, you give the DEXA and you do the cortisol on the next day. So before giving the hydrocortisone, cortisol sample to be drawn, then you do the steroids. So this is because the single time diagnosis is changing the life of the entire population. Otherwise, we have to stop the therapy and we have to reassess the again. So this particular girl have the serum very low cortisol as well as the very high ACTH. So normally in classical cases, it should be less than 2, and 2 to 5 may be a borderline cases. But since this individual has already the ACTH of very high, and you can very classical of very low cortisol and very high ACTH. And when is the syntrophin test needed? Usually we don't have the classical synthetic ACTH. This is the one formulations Acton prolongatum. So basically it is a drug used from the neurology predominantly, and from endocrine side we used to have this stimulation test in suspected cases. And so the peak cortisol by giving this particular Acton prolongatum, if it is rising the more than 20, it is diagnosed as the adequate stress response. So the CT abdomen and the CT chest were normal. So, and in view of the young onset primary adrenal insufficiency with the positive consanguineous history and absence of TB and imaging and sputum AFB were negative with a very high anti-TP antibody. So the possible of autoimmune adhesions were suspected in this particular girl. And we do have currently in India the 21 hydroxylase antibody. So the probable of autoimmune adhesions were suspected in this particular individual. And she was treated with the hydrocortisone as well as the fludrocortisone because of the growth-friendly steroids or hydrocortisone. Better not to avoid prednisolone in growing children. And in once the bones are fused and they reach the adult, we can use the prednisolone in such individuals. So hydrocortisone may be the drug of choice in a growing age children's. And this particular individuals, she presented again 6 months later to the pediatricians with the features of carpal spasm, and she had the features of Chaustick sign and Roshio sign were positive. So in view of suspected hypoparathyroidism, these particular individuals were evaluated 1 year later or during the second presentations of admissions with this is the basic profile to rule out hypoparathyroidisms. So the phosphorus is one of the most important the biochemical determinant of hypoparathyroidism. So the phosphorus is one of the less recognized test in the field of our clinical practice. So whenever the high phosphorus is there in presence of normal renal function, and we always suspect hypoparathyroidisms in presence of low calcium with high phosphorus and the low PTH. So low PTH, the PTH to be taken in immediately, it should be freezed during the transport. Otherwise, it is a very fragile peptide. And in view of low calcium and high phosphorus with the low PTH, the particular individual diagnosed as hypoparathyroidism. So the autoimmune adhesions disease with the hypoparathyroidism, and these particular individuals added calcitriol and vitamin D. So these both individuals, the both conditions requiring lifelong follow-up. Since the child is around 8 years or 9 years, and she has to be on lifelong steroids, and one should not, one has to given the instructions regarding not to stop and change into the injectable formulations whenever there is a presence of crisis, and not to skip any tablet or any form of therapy. And similarly, this particular child, she has to take lifelong calcitriol. So many of the times it is also irreversible situations. So the lifelong steroids and lifelong active vitamin D like calcitriol is going to be a thing. And subsequently, this child has 3 years later, while on follow-up, she has almost the patchy alopecia. You can see that this much amount of the hair loss. So that this is the mild variety in 2016. On 3 years of follow-up, she had the severe form of alopecia. And so the classically, this case is fitting into the APS type 1 category, hypoparathyroidisms and autoimmune adhesions. So all form of autoimmune, once we ruled out the tuberculosis, we indirectly labeled them as the autoimmune adhesions. So in India, because of the tuberculosis care is improving, and the government is also monitoring all the tuberculosis patient, we are finding the less incidence of tuberculosis in the current situations. So the autoimmune adhesions, it is being the more common etiology in current situations. So this particular patient's adhesions disease is noted in around 60 to 70% of the APS type 1, and hypopara is the most common manifestation. So in case of hypopara also, we have to periodically follow this type of individuals in view of the disease may evolve at any point of time. And mucocutaneous candidiasis may be a first manifestations, but many of the times it may be missed because they may go into the dermatologist. And the alopecia, pernicious anemia, vitiligo, Sjogren's, SLE, rheumatoid. So more common in the female, it is a childhood onset the autoimmune syndrome, and the disease may evolve at a particular period of time. So what I want to highlight it here is any suspected autoimmune additions, we need to be followed vigilantly. And the disease manifestations or the complex of symptoms may not develop at a particular point of time. So it may evolve over a period of time. That's what I want to highlight. In genetically predisposed individuals, these additions may happen at any point of time. So the high index of suspicions in such individuals. This is one of the table from Williams. You can see that the mucocutaneous may be the first manifestations, and the second there may be the ovary atrophy. And luckily, this child, particularly currently LHFS, is in the normal remit. And hypoparathyroidism may be the second most common, and they may have developed the type 1 diabetes. So this is the complex of endocrine symptoms in a particular individual. This was a thing. And 3-4 more slides. This is again another the Addison's disease and optimal steroids of hydrocortisone and fludrocortisones, and normal CT and abdomen chest on 2015. She presented 2018 with vomiting and dysphagia. And particularly any additions with vomiting and dysphagia, always it is a type of some adrenal crisis or some precipitating factors is going whenever the patient's not skipping the tablet on optimum therapy. And in view of vomiting and dysphagia, these patients presented to the gastroenterologist, and the CT was done, and it's showing the dilated, the mediastinum with the dilated esophagus. And subsequently underwent barium solo. You can see that there is a red tail appearance or the widened esophagus with a narrowing of the lower end of the esophagus. And she was diagnosed with the endoscopy, showing the dilated tortuous esophagus with the tight sphincter with fluid level. So in view of these all three component, and subsequently this history was asked. In many of the times we still lacking the history taking, and we have to improve. And these patients subsequently found out to have a lacrima in the view of Schirmer test and the dry eye. And so in view of additions with subsequently the aclasias and a lacrima, she was diagnosed as a Algrove syndrome. And she was treated with the balloon dilatations. And want of time, I'm skipping. So any bilateral adrenal mass, again, we need a tissue biopsy after ruling out the pheochromocytoma, probably maybe a CT guided tissue. And adrenal calcifications is more common in tuberculosis. So I want to highlight it here that any case of primary adrenal insufficiency in a young onset or in middle age, after ruling out tuberculosis, always suspect the autoimmune additions, and always try to follow them with very closely. And sometimes they may present to the neurologist with adrenoleukodystrophy, or they may present with the other features of like autoimmune polyglandular syndromes or any infiltrative diseases in the adrenal. It can be carefully looked in. And so with that, I'm concluding my talk. Probably maybe the time. So if any time is there, I will share some other case. Otherwise, I will finish it up here, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Sridhar, for your wonderful lucid presentation about the challenging cases. In fact, the first case you highlighted how macroadenoma is progressing, and subsequently the patient is coming with you unaware with pregnancy. And also the second case of polyglandular syndrome, where a combination of adrenal insufficiency and hypoparathyroidism. To start the discussion, I just wanted, can I have the chat box? Can I have the chat box here? Questions are there?
Currently, there is no questions.
There's no question, sir, in the chat box.
I just want to ask you, Dr. Sridhar, that in the first case, even though we know that MRI does not cause any major problems of screening during pregnancy, What is the reason for you to do when the visual field charting was normal? Why you just started the cabergoline and stayed for the clinical features? Why you proceeded with MRI? Any particular indication?
Since we have started cabergoline some 5 months back, and she has stopped cabergoline while after conceptions, and she became symptomatic at the middle of the trimester. Even she doesn't have any symptoms of galactorrhea immediately after stopping. And we may expect that there is a chance of regrowth during pregnancy. We may not be able to differentiate whether the prolactinoma is growing or there may be the normal hyperplasia of the pituitary. And many of the times what currently ophthalmologists using the visual field, may not be like user friendly, but she doesn't have any symptoms of bitemporal hemianopia. For the safer side, we did the MRI. Otherwise, since no other option is there for this type of individual for the risk of pregnancy, and many of the times from obstetrician side, the pre-existing tumor, while they referred, they also wants this type of for the safer confinement to decide regarding the future plan of delivery. And this particular individual, she subsequently delivered, even normal delivered these individuals, and the baby doesn't have any congenital anomalies on follow-up visits.
And regarding the second case, did you find any other autoimmune endocrine conditions associated with it, apart from you checked for the sugar and other things?
Yes, sir. Diabetes, she doesn't have any diabetes by routine blood sugar, but we have not done any autoimmune antibody for GAD antibody like for diabetes. And the only thing, some mild anemia was there, but the anti-parietal cell antibody may be one of the options in this particular individual. But we didn't, only we did B12 and peripheral smear, and it was not found any macrocytic or megaloblastic anemia in these particular individuals.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sridhar, for the wonderful presentation. I once again pass to Dr. D.P. Nayak to take the proceedings further.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Dr. Nayak.
Thank you, Sundaraman sir and Dr. Sridhar. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce the next speaker, Dr. Dalapati Sadhacharan. He is a MS and MCH in endocrine surgery, currently working as an associate professor, Department of Endocrine Surgery at Madras Medical College. He is also senior consultant at Apollo Kaveri and Vijaya Hospital. He is the awarded Best Resident Award from SGPGI Chandigarh. And he has more than 30 publications and written various books. And he also the secretary of Tamil Nadu Medical Council. I invite Dr. Dalapati Sadhacharan to deliver his talk.
Hope it's visible, sir.
Yes, visible.
Good morning to Tendo team headed by Dr. Vijay Bhaskar Reddy. I'll be talking the next 20 to 25 minutes on the challenges and lessons in thyroids and parathyroids. I'll just give the cases which we have encountered over the last 10 years. So coming out of the first case, she was a 58-year-old lady, mother of a doctor without any comorbidities, had a difficulty in breathing and pain over the neck over a period of 6 to 8 hours. So she was shifted to hospital, and on the examination of the neck, there was a tense swelling in the thyroid, and ultrasound also showed a possibility of hemorrhage in the pre-existing thyroid. So intraoperatively, you can see the blood extravasation into the strap muscles, and this is the thyroid cyst which had a hemorrhage and caused the respiratory distress. So this is an uncommon case to have a hemorrhage into the, so though we have experienced this. So she was discharged on the post-operative third, and the diagnosis with a hemorrhagic cyst of thyroid. So this is the next case where a 52-year-old lady presented to the emergency ward with respiratory distress. So she was intubated by the and on examination of the neck, it was normal. All other workup was done. So during the workup, the CT revealed a retosternal mass compressing on the trachea, which was continuation with the thyroid. Here you can see the endotracheal tube within the trachea, and you can see the thyroid gland. So this is the clavicle. You can see the mass which has been wedged between the trachea as well as the clavicle and the sternum. So it was a case of intrathoracic mass compressing on the trachea, causing the respiratory distress which had brought that. So this is the operative specimen of the thyroid gland with the retosternal mass, which was taken out, and the patient was relieved post-surgery, and she was discharged on the 5th post-operative day without any complications. So the next case would be a 45-year-old gentleman who presented with compressive features that in the form of dysphagia for 6 months. On examination, it was a multinodular goiter and FNAC was benign. On the chest and the neck and the chest X-ray, you can see this the deviated trachea to the left side and a shadow which is going into the intrathoracic extension. This is the thing you can see. So this is a case of on surgery. We found a giant tubercle of Jugar candle which was going into the retosternal location, which was compressing on the esophagus, which was wedged between the esophagus and the trachea, which was removed. We did report this case, which was an unusual form of presentation where it was around 8 centimeter tubercle of Jugar candle. The next case is a 31-year-old female with a thyroid mass and right cervical lymph nodes. FNAC showed it's a papillary thyroid carcinoma with lymph node metastasis. So we performed a total thyroidectomy and the central and lateral neck dissection on the right side. Histopathology was consistent with the papillary thyroid carcinoma and lymph node metastasis. So this is the chest X-ray. You can see there are no pulmonary meds, and the trachea was deviated to the left side, and there was a suspected mass here. So this is a CT scan preoperative which was done, showed multiple lymph nodes on the right side, and this is also a lymph node which was in the superior mediastinum. So we proceeded with surgery where you can see the right lobe of the thyroid and the central compartment lymph node, which we believe that was in the suprasternal area, and this is the recurrent nerve which we preserved. So this is the gross specimen, and post-operatively the histopathology came as a papillary thyroid carcinoma with lymph node metastasis. So she was planned for radioiodine therapy, but on 4 weeks post-surgery, when the TSH was done, it was around 6. So we were a little bit confused. So we were working. So again, we repeated in another lab also. Again, it was around 5 to 6 only. So we thought we will wait for another 2 weeks, and we did again repeat the TSH, which was around the same level. So we thought of any other tumor somewhere in the pituitary causing TSH, something like that. So we worked up on that. During that workup, we also did a technetium maintenance scintigraphy. We found a mass in the same area where we believed we have removed the suprasternal or the superior mediastinal mass, and the MR imaging was also consistent with the same thing. So we performed a combined neck and thoracic approach with a incision over the third intercostal space. We did remove the thyroid mass. So it came out to be a thyroid mass that is consistent with the thyrothermic thyroid rest. So that was the one which we have missed in the first surgery, believing that we have removed the mass which was lymph node, though it was into the superior mediastinum extending well below. So post-surgery, the TSH was high and had radioiodine therapy, and she has completed 7 years of follow-up. So this is one important lesson which we learned, these thyrothermic thyroid rests can be missed when we don't clearly look for it. So this we reported in BMJ case report also as a non-elevation of TSH after total thyroidectomy. So we had a little bit of cases of embryological remnants and their prevalence, and we did publish this in around 1,118 cases of total thyroidectomies in our series. So the next case would be a thyroid swelling with 20 years duration and sternal swelling of 2 years. The patient had a SVC compression in the form of dilated veins over the abdomen and over the neck, but he was stable. FNAC on both the swellings showed us a follicular carcinoma with metastasis. So we did plan for a surgery. First, we thought we would do both thyroidectomy and the excision of the sternal, as well as the, you can see here, this is the chest X-ray, which the mass was the bony swelling. And you can see the erosion of the clavicle on the left side. And this is the sternal swelling. So we need to do a clavicular sternal excision has to be done, which was a major procedure considering his age. And so we thought the patient was also a little bit hesitant to proceed with the first time itself. So we planned for a initial case of a total thyroidectomy in the first sitting, and then proceed with the sternal as well as clavicular excision post-op, maybe after 1 or 2 months. But unfortunately, we lost the patient to follow-up, and we have not seen, because he came from North India here and he didn't return back. So we did report this case as a case of pulsating sternal and clavicular metastasis of thyroid follicular carcinoma. The next case is a 70-year-old female who had a bilateral thyroid mass with right cervical swelling. The cervical mass was firm and extending below the right clavicle. FNAC done was suggestive of a follicular neoplasm. The FNAC on the right, the cervical mass, which was extending below, was hemorrhagic. So we did imaging, which showed a thyroid mass, and you can see this is the thyroid mass. And here in the right IJV, you can see the there's a tumor which was seen clearly, which was extending into the superior vena cava and going up to the right atrium. Here you can clearly see this. It was a thing. So we did presume that it is a case of a thyroid carcinoma, which the tumor thrombus propagation up to the right atrium. So under a cardiopulmonary bypass, we did total thyroidectomy and opened the internal jugular vein and the up to the right atrium, and we removed the entire tumor thrombus in toto. And this is the specimen after surgical thing. And the histopathology was consistent with the Hurther cell carcinoma, and postoperatively she didn't have any problem, and she was discharged on the 10th post-op day. She's still under follow-up of 6 years, and last month also she came, and her TG and everything is normal. This is another case of thyroid swelling of 15 years duration with stridor and hemoptysis. FNAC was consistent with the papillary thyroid carcinoma. So this is the swelling which you can see, and the CT scan, see there is a tumor which was extending into the trachea, which was causing the stridor and the hemoptysis. So it was a case of a tumor which extending into the trachea. Tracheal invasion was there, that was causing the stridor and hemoptysis. So this, after removal of the tumor, you can see the tumor bed over the trachea. Still the tumor was there. So we did a tracheal resection of 4 rings and did a primary end-to-end anastomosis. So anastomosis was done, and post-operatively the tension relaxing sutures was made, and you can see the tracheal ring which was resected. So tension relaxing sutures was made after surgery, and she was discharged on the 10th post-operative day. And still on follow-up, she has completed 9 years of follow-up. Presently TG is around 45, because at that time itself she had lung mets, and we have given cumulative dose of 500 millicurie of radioiodine. This is another case of thyroid swelling of 9 years duration, which was hard in consistency. But on examination, the right carotid was not felt. FNAC was consistent with papillary thyroid carcinoma. Here you can see the carotid artery, which was encased by the tumor circumferentially. All the 360 degrees, the tumor was encasing the carotid artery and the internal jugular vein. See, this is the carotid artery and the internal jugular vein. So this is not a contraindication for surgery. That's what I want to show in this case, which here you can see the right common carotid artery, which was going through the tumor, which was the tumor was laid open and the carotid was freed. So you can see the carotid artery which was freed, and the right internal jugular vein was ligated. So this is the specimen. So next, coming on to the parathyroids, this is a 42-year-old female referred to us with a failed parathyroid surgery, which was done 3 months back. It was done elsewhere. While reviewing the records, we found the neck was explored and they could not find the parathyroid. And they have removed a normal parathyroid, and with the frozen study also has confirmed it. So, but still the calcium and PTH was high. So we did repeat the ultrasound system EB. It was consistent with the previous findings, the same uptake on the right side as was the previous set. So this was the ultrasound finding showing a hyperechoic nodule with a hyperechoic rim. And this is the thing in the delayed images. So you can see the scar of the previous surgery. So she was again re-explored. So I could not find any parathyroid lesions elsewhere in the carotid sheath or elsewhere. So while palpating the right thyroid lobe, we found a nodule in the right thyroid lobe. So removed the thyroid lobe, and the cut section showed a intrathyroidal parathyroid, which is not so common. So it's a case for intrathyroidal parathyroid adenoma. This also we reported in BMJ. Next case, interesting case of a 49-year-old gentleman who presented a sudden headache and unconsciousness. He was received by the emergency team, and he was intubated and kept in a high dependency neuro unit. So they thought something related to the neuro problem, and he was worked up. On 4th to 5th day, they found mass in the parietal occipital region of enhancing mass, but there was no midline shift in this. So while working up in the neck and the chest, they could find multiple nodules which are suspected of secondaries. So while the evaluation was done, the calcium they found to be high. It was around 20, and the PTH was 1980. So it was consistent with the primary hyperparathyroidism. And on examination, the neck mass, there was a hard mass over the neck. So we thought it's a suspected case of parathyroid carcinoma with a hypercalcemic encephalopathy. So it was explored. Here you can see the thyroid. Also, there's a hard parathyroid mass over the lower lobe of the right pole of the thyroid, which was adherent. So an en bloc resection was done. Already the nerve was infiltrated, so it was also sacrificed. So we could remove the tumor en bloc along with the thyroid, and few lymph nodes were also there in the central compartment, which we removed. So this operative specimen, and the cut section shows a hard whitish mass, which is classically it's a case of a parathyroid carcinoma on morphology. So the histopathology also did confirm that. And post-operatively, the calcium didn't come to normal. It is around 12 and the PTH 300. And he was put on cinacalcet 60 milligram, and he was doing fine. So we did report this also, case of hypercalcemic encephalopathy due to parathyroid carcinoma. The last case is a 14-year-old neonate who presented to emergency with failure to thrive and hypotonia. He was intubated in the high dependence ICU, and during the routine evaluation and the protocol, they did a calcium also. The calcium was found to be 30. So the PTH was 413 and vitamin D was low. So ultrasound of the neck was done, which was normal, and the system EB was also normal. So it's a case of neonatal primary hyperparathyroidism causing hypercalcemia. So this is a baby. So after evaluation and then stabilization after 2 weeks, around the 28th day post-life, we plan for surgery of a total parathyroidectomy and transcervical thymectomy. So this is the operative field where you can see the enlarged parathyroids and the nerve. So we did a total parathyroidectomy, removing all the 4 parathyroids as well as the thymus. So this grossing specimen of all the 4 parathyroids as well as the thymus. So I would just like to show you I thought of showing the video of the boy who has completed 9 years of follow-up, and he is doing well and on calcium supplements. So we did report this. We had a experience of 4 cases of severe primary neonatal hyperparathyroidism, which we have published this, and it's a thing. So thank you for the patient listening. I will be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Dalapati, for such a wonderful presentation on various interesting cases on thyroid and parathyroid with very long-term follow-up. There is no question from the chat box, but I want to know in the case of that parathyroid, which is intrathyroid parathyroid, did you do any other imaging to localize, or you just go ahead and upon the?
No, sir. Dr. Nayak, we did repeat the ultrasound as well as system EP. So it was consistent as the previous preoperative imaging.
Okay.
Both the ultrasound as well as the system EP. We did repeat that.
And about this neonatal hyperparathyroidism, did you done some genetic testing on this?
Yeah.
Yet?
Of the 4, we have published in the Indian Journal of Endocrinology and Metabolism. Of the 4 cases, we have done 3 cases genetic testing. Out of those, one baby had a novel mutation of this calcium sensing receptor. Other 2 had a homozygous mutation only, and 3 cases we did calcium sensing receptor mutation. Both were homozygous for the CSR gene. One boy, we could not do that because of some logistic reasons.
In this patient of that parathyroid carcinoma, you have started them on Cinacalcet. What is your experience on like responsiveness to Cinacalcet in either in primary hypothyroidism where we cannot operate, or in these cases like a parathyroid carcinoma where they not get complete cure?
Actually, Cinacalcet is not a substitute for surgery. That's what I would tell. It can be used as a in patients where we can buy time for surgery or fail operative cases. We did use Cinacalcet in all these 2 cases of neonatal severe primary hyperpara also, because the one boy which we operated at 4.5 years, he was diagnosed at 1 month of life, but he was on Cinacalcet, and Dr. Sriram Mahadevan was looking after the baby. So when he presented to us, it was around 4.5 years. Till that time, he was on Cinacalcet only. And another 2 cases also, the baby was put on Cinacalcet, which we have used effectively in the preoperative setting of neonatal severe hyperparathyroidism. Few other cases where, like this patient post-operatively, where we could not, because already there is metastasis to the brain and the lungs. So there is no other role of chemotherapy or radiotherapy. So we have to anyhow bring the calcium level down. In this parathyroid carcinoma, we have put on Cinacalcet around 60 milligram. Maximum we have tried up to 90 milligram per day of Cinacalcet. It works actually. Though literature supports the use in secondary hyperparathyroidism, we have used it in few cases of primary hyperparathyroidism as well for these failed cases or patients with primary hyperparathyroidism waiting for surgery or not fit for surgery.
What kind of surgery you do routinely for a patient with parathyroid carcinoma?
Actually, parathyroid carcinoma is a intra-op diagnosis, to be frank. Though there are various things which can say that hard nodule, very high PTH or palpable PTH, parathyroid tumor, all can point towards parathyroid carcinoma. But only the intraoperatively we can say whether the thing what we are dealing is a parathyroid carcinoma or not. The minimum procedure for a parathyroid carcinoma to be done would be a hemithyroidectomy along with the parathyroid tumor excision and with or without central compartment lymph node dissection. So we will do a en-bloc resection of the tumor along with the hemithyroid specimen and central compartment lymph nodes. So that is be the minimal procedure that would be required.
There are no question from chat box. Sundaraman sir, you have any question to Dr. Dalpati?
Dr. Dalapati is a very senior most endocrine surgeon in Tamil Nadu, and he has done a wide series of surgeries. I just want to have his opinion on autotransplantation of parathyroids. What is the success rates?
Sir, actually, auto-transplantation of parathyroids we routinely do during thyroidectomy, sir.
Yeah.
What we do is we identify all the 4 parathyroids. If the parathyroids are viable during surgery, we just leave it. Not only identification of the parathyroid, the vascularity of the parathyroid has to be intact. So post-surgery, we see the color of the parathyroids, whether the parathyroid is looking the same as the previous one or not. Suppose if there is any discoloration due to vasospasm, which can happen. In that case, we will take out the parathyroid and mince it very fine and do an auto transplantation in the sternocleidomastoid muscle. The success rate is around 90 to 95% if it is done. The thing is, it takes time for the parathyroid tissue to function. It takes around 4 weeks for the parathyroid tissue. The fine we mince, the more the possibility the parathyroid tissue will survive. Just like a split skin graft where they take the fine skin graft so that it will survive, because it survives basically by osmotic inhibition, not by vascularity. Once the parathyroid fragments which we implant into the sternocleidomastoid, it takes time for neovascularization to occur, which will start only by 1 week after surgery. So the neovascularization will complete only after 4 weeks. So this immediately after immediate auto transplantation has a very good results. Suppose there is any inadvertent parathyroidectomy, we have removed the thyroid specimen, we find some parathyroid in the thyroid specimen, then we'll do the auto transplantation the same way. Ideally, we will keep in an ice cold saline, surrounded by ice cold saline before we auto transplant. Suppose if you are doing after 10 or 15 minutes, what we do is immediately take out the parathyroid and do an auto transplantation, not waiting for till the thyroidectomy is over, then to auto transplant. So there are 2 ways. Either we will do immediate auto transplantation or keep in an ice cold saline, do an complete the thyroidectomy procedure, then auto transplant it. The main thing is there must not be any hematoma or bleeding when we are auto transplanting into the muscle, because once there is any blood clot or into the muscle where we are auto transplanting, the parathyroid tissue will not survive, because as I said, it needs plasma for survival. So if bleeding is there in the muscle where we are auto transplanting, it will not survive. So we need to take care of these things.
If there is no more question from the chat box, sir, we thank both the speaker, Dr. Dalapati and Dr. Sridhar, for such a wonderful session and excellent presentation. Now I close the session and hand over the program to organizer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I thank the chairperson